An eerie, crackling noise filled the room as the forge, filled with deadly weapons, burned with a bright flame. Upon this forge, Arhan stood still as he was glancing at the bright forge. He drew a molten hot sword freshly out of the forge. He gripped his will and was trying to focus as he continued to pull the sword out of the forge. Consumed by fear, he opened his mouth and went close to the molten sword, as if he was about to take a bite at it. Arhan bit through the sword, and it broke instantly as he bit through it, tolerating both the heat and the pain from it. And the Swordmaster continued to devour the molten sword. A memory flashed before his eyes. Standing beside his father, they stared at a huge portrait of his ancestor and his sword while his father was narrating a story. His eyes gleamed with admiration as he explained about the knight called the God of War, righteous and admired by all, and favored by the king himself. He patted Arhan as he was explaining that his family was chosen by the sword, which produced swordmasters generation after generation. The sword shone as he explained why everyone spoke their name with reverence. Caravan, the invincible protectors. The huge portrait comprised a battle-hardened and bearded old man with a fur cape holding a double-edged sword facing towards the ground. His father placed his hand firmly over Arhan's shoulder and reminded him of his reality, that Arhan would succeed his father as head of House Caravan. With a bright hope, his father advised him, telling Arhan to live with pride in the steel blood flowing through his veins and his lineage. He also entrusted his wish to Arhan, to reclaim their glorious name and stand proud as the protectors of their land. The sun set over the horizon behind the mountain, while his father passed the torch to Arhan, the mission of the House Caravan. As years passed, Arhan grew up with his father's ideals, and one day, the sun shone bright over the vast wheat field. The crops were healthy, indicating the land was fertile and was bouncing along in the wind. In the middle of the day, Arhan roamed through the fields and started to harvest the wheat with a sickle. He placed the harvested crop down on the ground, wondering if all the stories his father told him when he was a kid were probably tall tales. Tired from harvesting, he looked up and stretched his back as he realized it was common for fallen nobles to lie about the past just to get by. And if the caravan story were true, the reach for ruling would be greater and wouldn't stop with a village. He picked up the harvested crops and, confused about where to place them, he asked directions from another farmer. He placed the harvested crops in the cart as he was thinking that he wouldn't be spending days farming alongside the villagers if the stories were true. He even noticed there were too many plot holes in his father's stories. One of them was visible through plain sight, the family's founder and the old man in the portrait. Arhan realized there was no resemblance. Both he and his father had no resemblance to the old man from the picture, and the preserved heirloom, the sword that hung below the portrait, was so sharp and sturdy for its age. Secondly, Arhan even tried to search the whole kingdom's history books. None of them ever mentioned his ancestor's name, Liam Caravan. Sometimes he got too tired searching for the clues and even passed out midway. Considering all these facts as he was standing in the middle of the field, he concluded that it was all made up to give future generations something to be proud of. As he was thinking about it, one of the villagers called Arhan asked about his zone out. Since it was a snack break, he insisted Arhan come quickly, or else the warmest bread would be gone. One of the old farmers said he would eat it himself if he delayed any further, and the other lady helped the old man as he choked while he was eating the bread. The sun shone bright over Arhan, smiling at joy as he witnessed the scene. He understood that even if the caravan wasn't a great family, everyone who welcomed him exists right here. With immense joy, he rushed and knew he loved this place, where he could live alongside the people who welcomed him. He understood that it was the caravan he wanted the most, even if the stories were fake, and hoped things would stay the same. Reality sank in as Arhan witnessed a massacre, with blood splattered and dripping over the wheat field everywhere in the middle of the night. A few hours before sunset, Arhan was heading to the market in the next village as his harvest quota was met, and the villagers were giving their regards as Arhan rode his horse. As an act of kindness, Arhan even told everyone that he would pick up what everyone needed while he was there. Kun smiled as Arhan, the young master, said he would get him apples since he hadn't seen any fruits for a long time. Marino, one of the villagers, was filled with joy and surprised to see that Arhan told her that he would get a pretty doll for her youngest daughter as her birthday was nearing. But being the successor who would become the next lord, he understood his people well and had gotten ready to travel, filled with determination. Arhan rode towards the west, where the sun set as his people were sending him off. Brimming with ambition and enthusiasm, he rode happily as everyone was sending him off with positivity. The sun set over the mountains, and the wheat field glowed, but it wasn't a complete dusk yet. Kun, Marino and the old man were discussing and praising Arhan for his uniqueness and his kindness apart from the other nobles, and were worried about which noblewoman would marry him. As the sun had already set over the mountains, Kun suggested the others finish the work before it was completely dark with enthusiasm. As Kun was talking, without any disturbance in the air, his head was sliced into two. Before even Kun's brain could pass the message, he was executed swiftly, without even realizing pain, as Marino froze in shock, as she couldn't realize what exactly had happened. Blood splattered all over the villagers, while Marino still couldn't realize what was going on. But before she could even realize, her head was sliced diagonally, and just like Kun, she was executed swiftly before even her brain could register. Just as the day sank, the fields were now completely filled with blood, changing it from a serene and peaceful landscape into a violent and brutal one. Over the blood-filled field, there stood a long-haired man with a double-edged sword over his right hand, standing menacingly as he realized that this territory must be erased. The blood scene completely froze the other villagers in the field due to the overwhelming fear and malevolence of the intruder. They all had only one question on their mind at that moment. Who was that person? He took a step, walking past the villagers. His dead eyes, filled with malice, had only one intention about the territory. Within a moment, every one of the villagers in the vicinity was all diced up into multiple fragments, executing them perfectly in that instant. Blood splattered everywhere as he was empty and was merciless about his actions. With the sole intention of destroying the territory, he walked over the town, seeking more malevolence. As Arhan returned to the town in the middle of the night, he dropped all the apples and the doll he bought for Kun and Marino. The fallen objects stayed still on the ground as he was completely flustered and stood still on the ground. He started to sweat and panic as he couldn't comprehend what exactly had happened to everyone. Arhan froze in fear and shock as he gazed upon the dead bodies and sliced body parts of his villagers, making it one of the most hellish scenes to bear witness to. As he was frozen, suddenly an old man appeared behind him and extended his arms towards Arhan. But he hugged Arhan from behind and covered his eyes to prevent him from getting traumatized due to the bloodshed scene. But the butler himself couldn't control his emotions for what had happened. From his voice and his build, Arhan realized it was his butler. The butler shed tears as Arhan was in disbelief about what had happened and what he witnessed. This broke him, and Arhan himself couldn't hold his emotions, crying while his butler covered his eyes, treating everyone as his own kin. But Arhan froze as soon as his butler mentioned this individual who entered the territory. He stood atop the lifeless bodies with only one mission in his head: to erase the caravan from existence. Within a span of 10 minutes, he finished the whole massacre, slicing and beheading everyone in his sight. He swung his blade with indifference, as he didn't care if it was a child, an old person, a male, or a female. Witnessing this, the villagers panicked and scattered throughout the village, running for their lives as the intruder walked towards them with malice. However, the intruder, who appeared without any warning, meant no escape for the villagers and killed everyone. Within that span of time, he extinguished almost half the lives in the territory, and with one single powerful slash, he destroyed and sliced every house in the vicinity. Not only humans, but his strength was also enormous. He was able to cut through boulders and brick walls with ease. The intruder had no remorse, as he was just following the orders that were given by his master. Listening to all these details, both Arhan and his master were not able to hold back their tears. And within one single night, the whole village was on fire, with half of its population ceasing to exist, all because of a swordmaster, a walking disaster in the form of a single man. Amidst all the chaos, the caravan's castle was still intact, calm under the full moon's gaze. Arhan and his butler both entered their castle over the gruesome scene of dead bodies and sliced heads filled with blood. Arhan stared at the lifeless corpses, all due to a horrific disaster that struck without warning. His eyes gleamed with pain as he saw the horrific massacre over his castle as well. The castle was completely filled with the lifeless bodies of his people, without heads and severed heads with no soul in their eyes, which stared back at his eyes, with the floor completely covered with innocent blood. Witnessing this scene, Arhan mentally broke down as he couldn't hold his tears back and held his head, completely filled with disbelief. Amidst his breakdown, Arhan heard a single voice near him, a familiar voice that comforted him, and paused his breakdown with one single word. With tears flowing through her eyes, Arhan's mother rushed towards him as she was worried about her son's health. She instantly hugged him and beamed as a single point of hope for Arhan, even in the middle of this disaster. His mother broke down, but she was grateful that her son was safe and that nothing had happened to him. Arhan trembled but still held and hugged his mother back despite his shivering after witnessing the massacre. For that single moment, the warmth from his mother's hug embraced him and brought relief that his family was all right despite the heavy bloodshed inside the castle. But Arhan realized that his father was also beside his mom, kneeling down and defeated. With total disbelief and shock, he held on to the blood-stained clothes of the fallen with just one question on his mind. Why did it happen? The whole family's mental state was shattered due to this incident, with the sense that something worse was coming up. The Swordmaster, who erased half of the caravan's territory in an instant, did not harm Arhan's parents and left a few words. With his father kneeling down with a broken sword as he was trying to protect his wife, Arhan's mother, the swordsman gave a warning. He warned them that he would return within a month, and those who wished to live must be gone from the land as he stared at his parents with dead eyes. Being powerless, the Lord, Arhan's father, was in tears as he questioned the Swordmaster why it was happening to his kingdom. Despite their peaceful nature and having not committed any sort of crimes, he yelled at them, questioning the Swordmaster's actions towards the innocent people. The Swordmaster turned his back as his father was screaming for answers. His empty eyes stared at the ground in silence. But the Swordmaster's silence broke as he said he was just following orders. The dust settled down for a moment, but the consequences of this massacre still persisted as the houses were destroyed. The rest of the caravan villagers were desperate for survival. They took the swordsman's words seriously, as they now know what he was capable of, and started to evacuate. Although only some villagers initially left the village, the rest followed suit, leaving one by one. But others had the choice, but Arhan's family didn't have that either. His father stood in a dark room, standing near some books, as he was trying to figure something out. Crushed by responsibility and helplessness, as the lord of the region, he smashed his head over and over against the wall, glorifying the caravan's history. He smashed his head over and over as he was powerless and not able to follow his pledge to protect the region and sever the head of the great evil that would arrive soon. But Arhan's mother eventually became calm as she knew what was about to happen and accepted it. With a soft gaze, she called upon Arhan's name. She placed her hands over Arhan's shoulders and told him that she arranged the carriage for their departure from the kingdom, and she was trying to convince Arhan to leave the country with his butler and go as far as he could. But Arhan refused to accept it, and with the fear of losing his parents, he pleaded with his mother that together they could convince his father and go to the far lands together. Arhan's mother knew it was not possible for him or her to leave, as the Lord cannot leave the place, yet she was calm about the situation. She knew that her husband was a determined man who would face the enemy as lord of the caravan until he drew his last breath, and as his companion she would stay with him until that moment. Arhan was completely torn up, as he could not give up on his mother and father yet, and refused to accept the situation. But Arhan's mother told him that the stories the Lord told him were not true, and all those things about righteous guardians and invincible protectors were just history filled with lies. Arhan broke down and was in tears, as he could not accept that they were all lies. And even if they were lies, he could not accept the situation. As the time was nearing, she asked him to promise about one thing. She asked Arhan to promise that he would never touch a sword again for the rest of his life, and that he would do whatever it takes to survive any situation. She held Arhan by his cheek and asked him not to seek revenge and insisted that he live for himself. But in that moment, the butler had arrived and told Arhan's mother that the carriage was ready to leave. But Arhan didn't want to let go of his mother, as he could not let her die. She grabbed Arhan and told his butler to take good care of Arhan and get him as far as possible before the Swordmaster arrives. The butler had no choice but to accept her orders, and he shed tears as well. He grabbed Arhan by his hands and took him to the carriage as he continued to beg his mother to join him. But his mother closed her eyes and prevented herself, and sadness filled her face. The butler insisted that Arhan go with him, but Arhan was persistent about his mother, and he still continued to shout at her and to join him. But his mother remained silent and continued to watch him go away from her. But she shed tears and expressed her love for Arhan and thought that at least he would survive and get to live his own life. The door creaked as someone opened it from outside. It was the same room where Arhan's father was banging his head as he felt powerless. He continued to bang his head as he slowly started to lose his sanity. A shadow crept behind him as someone entered the room. But the Lord didn't bother about the intrusion and continued to bang his head as blood started to drip over his head, and he lost his sanity due to his failure and powerlessness as the kingdom's lord. But it was Arhan's mother who entered his room. She hugged her husband from the back and tried to comfort him by asking him to stop suffering alone. Her selfless love towards him made her stay with him even in the last moment, as she chose to stay with him regardless of the Swordmaster's threat. The butler rode the carriage through the forest to take care of Arhan and keep him safe away from the Swordmaster. He tried to comfort Arhan by asking him to endure it, even though it was a devastating and heartbreaking moment in his life. The horse continued to gallop and pull the carriage as he was discussing how everyone was powerless against the Swordmaster, who was borderline a natural calamity that no humans could do anything to stop. Butler continued to ride as he asked his young master Arhan to accept it and move on. Only then would he be able to live on. He turned around to check on Arhan as he was telling him that the Lord and his mother would want the same. But the butler realized Arhan was nowhere in the carriage. Arhan escaped the carriage and was running through the forest. With a crossbow to his back, he rushed towards the kingdom's castle as he couldn't give up on his parents. He knew he couldn't run away alone, as he was brimming with confidence and determination to save his parents. He ran as fast as possible to the castle, realizing he wouldn't run away, dropping all of his responsibilities as a son. He knew that, despite being this powerful, the Swordmaster was still a human who would die if an arrow pierced his heart. During the spare time that the Swordmaster gave, he spent it all by collecting deadly poisons, and knew their potency would definitely kill him and protect both his parents. The sky was glowing red as he reached the castle, but he was late, as he was shocked after witnessing the horrific scene that had happened to him. His focus averted towards the castle's flag, as he noticed something was out of place near the pole of the flag. Arhan froze in disbelief. He saw his father's severed head impaled upon the flag as he was dripping blood from his neck. The entire flag was covered in his father's blood, as there was a lot of blood dripping over the sky. Arhan saw the Swordmaster who beheaded his father and impaled his head over the flag, and he also saw his mother lying on the ground, lifeless. It wasn't wise of Arhan to foolishly ignore the Swordmaster's warning, as he should have escaped when he had the chance. Arhan stood face to face with the Swordmaster. His death after all. The Swordmaster turned back, and with malevolence he stared at Arhan, telling him he did not show mercy to him. Arhan was still in disbelief that his parents were actually gone. Arhan's shadow fell over her corpse. He stood over his mother's lifeless body, knowing he could never see her talk to him again. Enraged by this, Arhan swiftly took his crossbow out and aimed at the Swordmaster as he was crying his heart out due to the loss he faced. But the Swordmaster showed no mercy at all, as he was determined to kill Arhan in the very moment. Suddenly, before even Arhan could react, he was beheaded in an instant as blood splattered everywhere. Both the Swordmaster and Arhan stood on the ground as the sun rose over the horizon. But Arhan dropped his crossbow as he was beheaded. He fell on his knees in that moment as the Swordmaster walked towards him. He felt an immense pain in his throat, trying to breathe as he felt the pain of being beheaded, but his head was still intact. The Swordmaster held his sword firm as he realized Arhan hadn't turned 18 yet, while Arhan was trying to gasp for air. Instead of executing him, he walked past him as he told Arhan to consider his good fortune that he wouldn't take his life at that moment, and wanted him to drown in that despair and die. He continued walking and said there should not be a single trace of the caravan's will remaining on the continent, as Arhan was trying to breathe amidst that pain. The Swordmaster threatened that he would come for Arhan if he tried to continue that bloodline. Arhan crawled to his mother's corpse as the Swordmaster walked away, almost eradicating the whole caravan. After a lot of struggles, Arhan finally came back to his knees. He held his mother's body, knowing how pathetic his situation had turned into. But in that moment, Arhan broke down in tears as he knew things couldn't go back as they were. He cried with agony upon his father's severed head and his mother's lifeless body, marking the day when he lost everything. But that's what he thought. The sword below the huge portrait started to glow, as if it were radiating an aura. Arhan was shocked to see the strange phenomenon, as he never witnessed anything strange about the portrait or the sword. A deep voice demanded respect from Arhan, as he was just too stunned to react. The portrait started to glow as the sword inside the portrait shone brightly. The portrait mentioned that Arhan was his descendant, which made all the stories that his father told him real. A year has passed since Arhan buried everyone in one place on the territory as the caste withstood the massacre, but with an empty flag. The blood stayed intact over the castle to remind him of his purpose over and over. And in the meantime, he was preparing for revenge the whole year. Arhan even collected intel about the Swordmaster who took everything from him. The Pinnacle, considered the strongest blade on the continent, is a protector who swore to safeguard the kingdom's peace and a righteous guardian who destroys evil. He was a transcendent being with the most brilliant talent among all the Swordmasters, the master of the 10 swords, Carlos. Even though Arhan knew the name of the person who took everything away from him, he was still unsure of his motives for killing his family And who was behind this massacre? But most of all, the only question that bothered Arhan was about the secret that the caravan held. The sun shone upon the fallen graves as he knew one thing for certain amidst all the confusion and questions. All the lives of the caravan that were so emptily extinguished would never return to life, no matter what happened. But to his surprise, the portrait gleamed with blue light, catching his attention after a year since that massacre. Arhan even questioned his own sanity as he thought he had truly gone mad from that unsolvable problem, as he continued to stare at the glowing portrait. He was surprised to see the occurrence of this phenomenon. A blue aura emanated throughout the portrait. The sword started to glow and emit a blue aura as well. A miracle, which was unbelievable, happened before Arhan as he witnessed the man in the portrait with shock, and he started to manifest. A spectral image of the man in the portrait appeared in front of Arhan and demanded respect from him. The spectral image of the man from the portrait quickly manifested into a real human right in front of Arhan. He was shocked to see his ancestor's appearance right before his eyes as he stood firm in front of him. It started to rain as the droplets hit the window's glass pane. Arhan froze in fear as time slowed around him and drops fell. He started to shiver and started to question his health as he wondered if he was suffering from severe psychological trauma for various reasons. As Arhan glanced through the spectral image, he started to wonder if it was possible for people to see visions due to the traumas. But the being before him was far too real and vivid to dismiss as such. The spectral image sensed chaos and turmoil in Arhan's heart. Considering Arhan's reaction, he even asked if he was afraid that he had truly lost his mind. Arhan was still shocked as the spectral image asked if he was shocked beyond measure that the ancestor he dismissed as a delusion and a lie forged in the past had appeared. But Arhan gathered all his sanity and asked him if this situation was reality and not an illusion. Was he truly the founder of their family? The ancestor was the strongest swordmaster in history, Liam Caravan. Arhan also questioned Liam if he was truly the one from his father's heroic tales. He wondered why Liam appeared now. Despite appearing before or during the massacre, Arhan was frustrated about the fact that he appeared after a year. With rage-filled eyes, he stared at Liam, questioning his appearance for this moment. But Liam retained silence and stared back at Arhan, as he was enraged with him. But Liam broke his silence and said he needed to confirm it himself, as revenge is a grueling path that shouldn't even be started unless Arhan was prepared to abandon everything. For the past year, Liam had been watching Arhan every day, understanding his obsession with never letting go of the sword, even for a single day. Amidst the wooden trunks, Arhan swung his sword till he exhausted himself, practicing vigorously to defeat the master of 10 swords, Carlos. Despite having a talent, Liam insisted that it was trivial and hopeless for Arhan to practice and fight. But Arhan's will never wavered, not even once. Every time he got tired, he woke up and swung his sword again, with the hopes of defeating his opponent. Liam, in his spectral form, stood face to face with Arhan as he said the answer was simple. So as for his appearance after a year, he glanced into Arhan's eyes and said that the hatred in Arhan's eyes had finally reached the depth he desired. Suddenly, an unknown pressure pressed onto the land, making the air heavy around him and Arhan. Liam added another reason that his patience had reached its limit. The pressure around him was induced by the bloodlust to tear apart the one who mercilessly slaughtered his descendants and the people of his territory. Even amidst the pressure, Arhan stood still, and Liam said, "In the history of this continent, there existed a truth that had never once been disproven. A swordmaster could only be killed by another swordmaster." Liam extended his hand towards Arhan as he said, "Even Arhan knew about it, and that is why he foolishly swung his sword and vowed revenge." But Liam gave a reality check to Arhan, that no matter how hard he trained alone for the rest of his life, he could never reach or defeat him. He said that a swordmaster is a transcendent being beyond the category of human and a supreme realm that even those called geniuses could not fathom. And even among swordmasters, Carlos stood at an unreachably high place as a transcendent. Liam added that even in his era, there were very few with such skill and potential. He stated that no one in the current generation could kill him. Arhan was too stunned to react as Liam mentioned that as time passed, he would become even stronger and greater. He started to question his reality as he knew the skill gap between him and Carlos, but it was so vast that it was beyond difficult and impossible for him to defeat him. Arhan's eyes filled with rage and anger as he realized he just had to watch as the man who killed his parents and took his people from him became a hero. Arhan felt helpless again, just like he was when he faced off against Carlos. But Liam added that from this moment the story would change. Liam told Arhan that he would aid him so he could become a blade sharper and stronger than Carlos and avenge his parents and his people. Liam's eyes glowed blue but were filled with determination. Arhan shared the same vision as Liam, as they both shared a common goal now, to judge that murderer as a caravan. Liam added that there was only one method, the sole path that only a caravan could walk. Liam ordered Arhan to devour his sword, as he was the descendant who inherited the steel blood. Arhan stood still as he didn't know how to react to Liam's command. The castle's forge was burning bright as it was filled with deadly weapons. The flame crackled with orange flame, burning hot enough to forge steel. Arhan placed Liam's pristine heirloom sword over the forge, making it molten red. An eerie crackling noise filled the room as the forge, filled with deadly weapons, burned with a bright flame. Upon this forge, Arhan stood still as he was glancing at the bright forge. He twisted the sword around, making the heat spread even throughout the sharp sword of Liam as he mentioned to Arhan that the caravan's bloodline was mixed with human and dwarf blood. Liam stood beside Arhan, who was melting his sword as he was telling Arhan that it originated from him, a dwarf half-breed. He also added that even though the physical traits of dwarves don't show through that blood, a special ability has been passed down to descendants. Liam explained his ability to consume blades, or swords to be precise, and make the memories and techniques of their wielder his own. He mentioned that it was the source of power that allowed Caravan to produce Swordmasters generation after generation and stand tall as a great family. Arhan was confused about all the information Liam told him. About devouring swords to inherit power, dwarves being friends of steel and fire were famous, but he had never heard of such a strange ability anywhere. Arhan continued to heat the sword as he was wondering why everything felt absurd, and about the stories that only confused him. However, he realized the truth can only be proven by results, and he had no choice but to call it hesitation. His eyes were filled with rage and determination as he asked Liam how to consume the sword. With a smirk on Liam's face, he mentioned the consumption method was simple. Arhan pulled the sword out of the forge as Liam instructed him to heat the sword until the blade softened. He instructed Arhan to chew and swallow the molten sword. But since it was molten hot, Arhan hesitated, as it would hurt and burn him pretty badly. But Arhan was locked in. He thought he might be trapped in a nightmare and lost his sanity completely, or he might be possessed by a mere spectral phantom. But as he gripped the sword and was hungry for power, he opened his mouth and went close to the molten sword as he realized even if there was the slightest chance between those two possibilities, he would do it. Arhan bit through the sword, and it broke instantly as he bit through it, tolerating both the heat and the pain from it. The flames consumed him as he bit through the sword. Arhan endured the burns as he was screaming due to the immense heat. His hand was consumed by the flame as he was enduring it. But the flame burned through his whole body as Arhan was enduring the agony due to both the flame and the intruder. Arhan screamed due to severe pain. It was as if he was completely consumed by the flames themselves. Arhan dropped the molten sword on the ground due to the immense pain. But in reality, Arhan's body didn't burn, but he felt the same level of pain throughout his body as he gripped his throat, and steam came through his mouth. He fell down on the ground, trying to endure the pain. But despite its heat, he swallowed it. Arhan pressed his hands on the ground, with his eyes filled with rage. Tears flowed through his eyes as he knew and realized why he was doing it. He remembered how his villagers were slaughtered in the gaze of the moon. He remembered how his father's severed head was hung over the pole of his castle's flag. He remembered how Mom was lifeless on the ground. But most of all, he endured it all by remembering the person who caused all of this suffering, burning with ambition for revenge against one man, Carlos. Despite the pain he was enduring, Arhan reached out his hand with his fingers open, as if he was trying to grab something. He grabbed and gripped the molten sword firmly. Arhan took another bite from the molten sword as his mouth was steaming due to its high temperature. He continued to devour the sword with only one intention, that he would succeed even if it killed him. He endured it, and bit through the sword and continued to devour it, as he was determined that he would become a swordmaster who would kill the master of 10 swords, Carlos. It was already dawn, as the sun was bright as usual, with birds chirping and leaves rustling with a mild breeze. Arhan woke up in the forge, freaking out, as he had a nightmare. He breathed hard and was surprised by the fact that he was still alive after what happened yesterday. He inspected his whole body, and he was not only alive but also sustained no injuries. He realized the pain of chewing and swallowing the molten metal was real. For a moment, Arhan thought that yesterday was just a dream, but fortunately, that doesn't seem to be the case. Because there would be no reason for only the sword's handle to remain next to him. Just as Arhan was trying to make sense of what happened, A phantom and a familiar voice caught his attention. Arhan turned back, as Liam's phantom body appreciated his mental strength as commendable, unlike his utterly weak body. Liam continued to walk towards Arhan from the back and continued to praise Arhan, as even among his ancestors, quite a few gave up, unable to endure the searing pain while swallowing and chewing molten metal. Liam asked if he believed his words, now and suggested that every legend of the caravan his father told Arhan was true. Arhan was surprised to notice and realize that Liam, his ancestor, was not some hallucination of his psychological trauma. He quickly laid his hand over the ground and introduced him as Arhan Caravan to his ancestor, Liam. He bowed down to Liam as he greeted his founder. Liam insisted that Arhan call him master instead of founder. His phantom levitated in the air as he mentioned that all who received his teachings called him master. Arhan agreed and addressed Liam as master. Since he devoured Liam's sword, he asked Liam if he had completely inherited the great power that Liam's father spoke of. Liam mentioned it last night while Arhan was heating the sword in the forge. He mentioned that consuming a sword grants its power to the descendants of the caravan. But Arhan felt nothing particularly different even after devouring his sword. Liam noticed a small problem about that, or rather, he mentioned it was Arhan's problem specifically. Arhan was confused again, as he was wondering what Liam mentioned and why it was ineffective, even though he did everything as he instructed. Liam mentioned his plan was to feed his beloved sword and elevate Arhan to the realm of Swordmaster. But he mentioned his blood has thinned over generations. While the ability to consume swords remains, the ability of caravans to digest the power within them seems to have greatly weakened. To reduce complexity, Liam mentioned Arhan. Then, in his current state, it was impossible for him to fully digest the essence of Liam's pristine sword. Arhan was surprised and realized that, in his current form, he would be a weak vessel for that immense power. Arhan remained silent as he was still kneeling down in front of Liam, as if he was trying to form a thought. He eventually understood what was happening and cracked a solution. Liam was surprised to see Arhan's reaction, as he accepted it without any further questions. Arhan was already aware of his body's inadequacy and limits. While the results were disappointing, he was grateful that another path remained intact. Liam was confused as to what path Arhan was talking about. Since Liam mentioned that it was impossible for Arhan to digest his powers in his current state, Arhan said it meant that someday he would be able to digest his powers, and he just needed to find a sword that would match his capacity. Liam agreed to Arhan's thought. He praised his perception, as it was already at a swordmaster's level. Liam insisted that he find a sword that is worn out, as the more worn with use, the better it is. He suggested Arhan guide him to a place with many old worn weapons. Arhan and Liam entered and walked through a region filled with debris, woods, and unnecessary items. Surprised by the amount of ominous aura the place was filled with, Liam mentioned that the dark mages would be quite pleased with all the artifacts that they could collect and store. Arhan mentioned that the place was a dump where everything old from the slums gathered, from worthless scrap metal to unusable weapons. He told Liam that this place would be most suitable to find a sword meeting the conditions he mentioned, and Liam considered it to be a good start. As they were walking over the dump, Liam mentioned that he used to devour swords in places reeking of blood like this place. He used to devour the swords gripped by the dead soldiers from both his and his opposing nation. He also devoured the axes, which used to be covered in dirt and blood, and also the spears lying about with broken shafts and other deadly weapons. Arhan was listening to Liam with surprise as he mentioned he ate them with all his might, over and over and over. He was surprised to see Liam's hunger for power and his capability to grow stronger and to survive no matter what it takes. Liam gleamed with nostalgia as somehow that dump reminded him of those times. As he was glancing over the debris, Liam knew the endless clashing and breaking to protect the spark of life, where some died today and some reached tomorrow. Those battlefields contained a lot of deadly, broken weapons wielded by the warriors, and in those struggles, countless lives inevitably vanished without a trace. But even if they vanished, someone leaves behind a single brilliant light. Over the dump yard, a golden beam of light emerged from the ground, acting as a beacon for its location. It was visible only to Liam's eyes, and thus he found the right tool for Arhan. He pointed his index finger towards the golden beacon of light and asked Arhan to take hold of it. Liam pointed his finger at a needle, which was almost like a rapier without a handle, perfect for stabbing and thrusting. Arhan's second sword. A month passed, and it was a full moon night as a few tried to break into the caravan's castle, as they were worried someone might spot them. A group of bandits walked inside the castle as they realized that both the village and the castle were empty and deserted of people. They continued to walk through the corridor, and the bandits were discussing if the mansion might have been used by a dark mage as an experiment lab and abandoned. But the other bandits said it was not possible, as if it were true. Then they would be dead the moment they stepped in. Later, the bandits theorized that this place was more likely to be a place where some fallen noble would be hiding as they entered the room. They realized the quality of the items present inside the castle was rich, and the smell of those high and mighty types was all over the place. A bandit wielding an axe sat down, as his partner said their luck had finally turned, and the job would be easier than they thought, as there was not even a caretaker. In the meantime, one of the bandits removed his mask as he found something over the cabinet. He yelled with excitement as he found a noble lady's dress over the cabinet, confirming his suspicions that a noble lady does live there, as it caught the attention of the other bandits as well. He took a whole bunch of fine women's clothes from the cabinet, which looked fresh. The other bandits couldn't believe what they saw or heard from this other bandit. Filled with lust, he smelled the fine clothes and knew the scent of skin was definitely different. The other bandit placed his hands inside his pants creepily as he was stimulated by the thoughts of assaulting women. He was tempted by the thought itself as he licked through the handle of the axe, knowing they might have some other fun too. The bandits started to fight as they were fighting for the fresh clothes, as others wanted to smell them as well, and started to search for a portrait to please themselves. But they all swiftly turned back as they were surprised by an intrusion to stop the ruckus they created. Arhan slowly emerged from the darkness. He said his mother liked things neat and clean, and she always hated messes. With a cold stare, he threatened the bandits to place the things they took quietly and suggested having a conversation. The bandits were still shocked by the intrusion, as they all panicked for a moment. They felt relieved after a moment, as they wondered who Arhan was and if he was the son of the mansion's master, while the other was sad that he couldn't find a portrait to please himself. But Arhan was genuinely concerned and asked if they came here for food or to find a place to stay. With empty eyes, he asked if it was one of those, as he was ready to accept them as neighbors. One of the bandits approached him, as he was confused about why he was speaking like that and if he had lost his sanity. But he was also egotistical and consumed with anger, as the nobles had no fear at all. He stood face to face with Arhan, wielding an axe as he said she should have just stayed hidden quietly instead of crawling out from the darkness. Arhan tried to show empathy for the intruders, but they sought violence. Arhan was disappointed. Enraged by this, the bandit charged his swing to slice Arhan in two and asked him if he wanted to die that badly. But Arhan remained calm and maintained his composure even though he was about to decapitate him. For an instant, his eyes turned orange as his pupils shifted from a circle to a standing line, just like a wild predator. Before he could even slice him, Arhan quickly unsheathed his needle and stabbed his gut. The needle pierced the bandit's back within a moment, as blood splattered everywhere. Due to the immense pressure exerted during the stab, the bandit even coughed blood as he couldn't evade it or even react to Arhan's reflexes. Blood splashed all over the vicinity, and Arhan was still calm as he understood they weren't uninvited guests, or rather, not guests at all. The fire was crackling as the wood continued to burn over the forge. Arhan and Liam were staring at the flames, as Arhan had a question in his mind. By holding the sword he obtained from the dump yard, he asked Liam if this was truly the sword he must devour to unlock his Swordmaster abilities. He realized it looked less like a sword and more like a needle. Arhan asked Liam if he tried to cut something with this needle. It would probably break helplessly, and Liam replied that it was natural and bound to happen if he tried to cut. But Arhan's confusion cleared as Liam stated that the needle wasn't made to slash enemies or smash them into pieces. Liam said the weapon had only one purpose during the battle, and it has the highest skill ceiling out of all the weapons. He said that in a life-or-death duel, this needle was used to pierce the enemy's vital point and instantly end their life. Its previous owner was observed as he stabbed and pierced through the neck. Arhan realized that it was a sword made for thrusting swiftly and ending the battle as quickly as possible. Arhan was confused, as he had never seen a sword that was entirely made for thrusting and stabbing the vital points. As Arhan was thinking, if it was meant for thrusting and stabbing, a spear would have been a better choice. But just as he was thinking, Liam understood what he was thinking and asked him if he was thinking the same, which made Arhan panic for a moment. Liam agreed that a spear would be great for thrusting or stabbing, but considering Arhan's weak and frail body, nothing would be more useful than the memories dwelling in that sword. Liam noticed the golden beacon over him as he felt Arhan would be the best vessel for that weapon. He stated that the needle's owner, before dying alone, had pierced the lives of over 200 enemies. Liam also added that the previous owner was a woman whose body type was even more delicate than Arhan's body. Thus, Liam asked Arhan to show some respect to the sword and devour it gracefully as the forge continued to burn bright. He turned around and walked towards the forge, as he knew the weight of the steel might be light. But what dwelt within the steel was a life of immense weight and solemnity. Arhan placed the sword inside the forge. As the blade started to become molten steel, it looked just like the pristine sword of Liam. Arhan waited for the weapon to heat up enough to devour it, and knew that by inheriting that woman's memories, he would gain many things. A memory flashed as the place was burning away with a lot of debris nearby. The girl's last memory was nothing but a burning mansion. When Mei Li, the previous owner of the needle, was barely 10 years old, many things had changed in her life. She and her entire family were caught up in the fire, as her parents had been reduced to ash in the flames, which burned bright, unrecognizable even in form. But luckily, Mei Li barely managed to save her own life. When she woke up in the hospital, she had nothing but one thought in her mind. She wished she had died along with her parents as the villagers continued to treat her burns and wounds. After losing everything she had within an instant, Mei Li came to live in a rundown orphanage where they used to worship the goddess of fire. A statue of the goddess existed in the middle of the orphanage, as they regarded fire as salvation, and Mei Li was dragged down to rock bottom once more. It was ironic for her to live and grow up in a place where everyone sees fire as salvation, while she lost everything to the same fire. She stared at her face through the mirror, staring at her burn scar on her face as she realized she hadn't escaped the flames yet. The days that followed there in that orphanage were peacefully horrific for Mei Li. People around her gossiped about her face, and rumors spread that she was cursed by the goddess herself. While others were scared of the mark of curse, which was simply a burn scar, others were disgusted by the sight of it. Even though she found another life in the orphanage, she was still treated as an outcast among everyone, as they treated her like a monster and were disgusted by the sight of her. But deep down, Mei Li heard everything and remained quiet, with only one single thought, that she wanted to end her own life. Every day she prayed for death to come, to escape from the flames of that day covering her face when she closed her eyes, and also from the same flames of pure hatred and disgust which surrounded her when she had no choice but to open them. But fortunately for Mei Li, that day had arrived. She witnessed a man who was practicing his swordsmanship skills under the full moon, even though it was rough and crude. Mei Li was mesmerized by the sword swings, which made her forget for a moment the hell that filled her mind. Mei Li met Hegel, an old swordsman and former wandering knight who had worked at the orphanage for years. Usually, she wouldn't have dared to utter or to say any word to the tough-looking old man. But that day, she walked towards Hegel out of curiosity. Mei Li was shy at the beginning, as she was nervous and asked him how she could become like him. Embraced by the beautiful gaze of the sword-swinging skills of Hegel, Mei Li was curious, as she wanted to learn it as well, thus taking her first step towards living. Hegel responded with silence as he continued to analyze Mei Li. Moments after that, he replied that the sword wouldn't help much in her life, especially since she was a girl. After hearing those harsh words, she was disappointed, and her face drooped down. But she was hesitant and stubborn about the fact that she wanted to learn it. Despite Hegel's advice, she stayed with an iron resolve that she would do whatever it takes to learn that skill. With confidence in her eyes, Mei Li told Hegel that she wouldn't be afraid of any fire in the world. She stayed there, implying she wasn't ready to give up, and she wouldn't be afraid to wield the blade. Hegel lifted a heavy barrel and placed it on the ground. He asked Mei Li to pick a sword from the barrel stash he had, and if she could swing it, he said he would teach her. Mei Li was analyzing which sword she should pick up, as everything was too big for her to wield. But she noticed something over the barrel and asked if she had to swing it. Confused about this request, Hegel replied, "If not swinging, what else would be possible?" Her hands reached over the barrel as she chose her weapon from the barrel stash. She took a sharp needle out of the barrel, compact and deadly enough to stab and puncture the vital points, and realized it would be the best for her build. She pointed it in front of Hegel and knew that as long as she could stand and fight, anything would do. Hegel replied with silence as she pointed the needle towards him. She stepped in and took her first thrust. Coming to the present, the bandit's blood was spilled everywhere as he realized the uninvited guests were not guests at all. He swiftly pulled it out of his lung as blood leaked faster, before even the bandit could realize what was happening. He collapsed and fell to the ground with only one single stab and dropped his hatchet on the ground as well. Arhan set his eyes towards the other intruders who were still on their feet. The other bandits froze in fear as they witnessed Arhan's quick reflex and immense strength to quickly stab and neutralize the biggest one among them. They were completely in disbelief, as they never thought nobles had such amazing sword skills. Arhan quickly cleaned his blade by shaking it off and realized there was no need for conversation anymore and was ready for a battle. Liam slowly observed from behind and appeared out of the same black room as he was analyzing Arhan's combat abilities. Liam was proud as he taught his descendant only one thing over the past month. Since Arhan was weak, he gave him a stamina training regimen so he wouldn't tire, even after running for hours and hours, making him more agile on the battlefield. But despite Arhan's request to teach him sword skills, Liam refused to teach Arhan any swordsmanship at all. Thus, Liam was surprised by the fact that a thrust like that was possible, meaning he was digesting Liam's pristine sword properly. Arhan gripped the needle firmly as he was prepared for this moment. Meanwhile, Liam was excited to see his young descendant's first steps in a caravan. The bandit continued to spit and choke on his own blood. The spot where that bandit was just pierced could only be reached by digging precisely between the ribs, his lung. Arhan stood firm near the fallen bandit and realized there was no way he could perform such a precise thrust, as he had zero skill or experience with swords. He gripped the needle firmly as he started to emanate a pink aura from his body, primarily emerging from the needle itself. But there was only one possibility for this phenomenon: the owner of the needle he had consumed a month ago. A shade of Mei's memories appeared parallel to his Arhan, indicating he had inherited her sword skills. Ever since that day, Hegel taught a lot of basics to Mei, like how to stand properly and grip a sword. But primarily, Hegel taught Mei how to fight and how to survive by correcting her rusts. Hegel trained Mei for seasons, regardless of the hard conditions faced by the winter cold itself. He observed Mei's form. Even though it was not a systematically established theory, Hegel's swordsmanship held the romance and freedom imbued from the wandering of a knight-errant. Mei was calm throughout the practice and maintained her form. She thrust quickly and precisely, even during the snowfall, with a firm footing as Hegel continued to analyze her from a distance. She knew that he held a strength that was, without a doubt, beautiful to one young girl who feared fire the most, as she lost everything she once had due to it. She was enjoying it and was happy throughout the practice as she truly loved Hegel's sword. Hegel was proud and happy about Mei's growth as a swordmaster. Several years passed, and as Hegel was on his deathbed, with only a few words left with him, he told Mei about the day when she would have to leave this place. Hegel's hand shivered as he held Mei's hand and asked her to travel to the wide world when that day arrives. Hegel's vision started to fade away as he mentioned, and he taught his final teaching to Mei. His vision blurred as he struggled to see her face clearly for the last time, as he was expressing his gratitude for her staying with him till the end of his journey. But he caught one clear picture of Mei as she was holding his hand with tears flowing through her eyes. She expressed her gratitude and said thank you for every lesson he had taught her, and hoped that he would rest in peace. But after that, she followed Hegel's final teaching as she left the orphanage and went out into the wide world. Hegel stood atop the dead bodies of bandits and faced off against a whole troop all by herself, as she made a name for herself as a fairly renowned mercenary. She walked over the corpses of the people she killed, with the whole scene filled with blood. She held onto her needle firmly as she was prepared to face off against everyone. But just because she used an unusual needle-thin sword, or just because she was a young woman, rare in this line of work, they called her Mei, the sewing gypsy. Arhan understood how the digestion worked just as his master Liam mentioned, as the memories of Mei flowed into his mind and spoke with him. The bandit froze, and terror filled his eyes as he couldn't control his tears. He started to tremble, and he was barely able to speak as Arhan punctured his lung. But consumed by fear, he begged for mercy and pleaded to let him live once. But just as he was begging, Arhan spun his needle with his fingers, and his sleight of hand skills were enhanced. He quickly stabbed the bandit again, ending his life decisively. He pulled his needle out again, with blood splattering everywhere. The blood covered his face as he finished him within an instant and with no hesitation. With his knees still bent, he was thinking about his first kill, which he executed moments ago. But for the first time, it was surprising, as he felt no emotion rising and maintained his calm and composure. Instead of showing mercy, he continued to walk towards the other bandits, as he understood that hesitation was defeat, and he simply saw the situation remaining before him. But he also realized that he exploited an opening because he underestimated Arhan. Arhan was cautious, as he was being outnumbered. He couldn't expect the same luck as before, and even they would have known it. Yet they weren't attacking even when they had the numerical advantage. And this made Arhan wonder why they weren't utilizing it to turn the situation upside down. Liam added from behind that they were just simply terrified of Arhan. They were scared of Arhan, as the movement he just displayed wasn't something that could be from a beginner. The other bandits started to shake and tremble as they simply didn't know what to do. Liam added that moderate fear aids survival, but excessive fear clouds their critical thinking ability and their objectivity. Liam stated that it inflates the enemies before his eyes beyond their actual size and makes Arhan mistake the bandits for a far mightier being. He told Arhan that from those bandits' eyes, Arhan was probably a murderous fiend himself, skilled with the sword. Arhan took a moment to breathe and understood what had to be done. Without any disturbance in the air, he quickly rushed in towards the group of bandits. The bandits froze after they witnessed Arhan's agility, as they were simply shocked, and Arhan almost closed the distance between him and the bandits. Arhan understood that this was the moment he needed to take advantage and gain an upper hand over the group of bandits. A bandit panicked as Arhan went close to him and threatened him not to come any closer. He threatened to kill him as he swung his two-handed weapon. But in that instant, Arhan quickly ducked to evade his swing. Since he mindlessly swung his weapon, Arhan ducked and sidestepped with ease. Just as he took the sidestep, Arhan quickly found an opening from his stance at that moment. It was at this moment that the bandit knew he lost. Just as he evaded the swing, it was hard for him to counter, as the momentum was too heavy for him to swing back. Thus, Arhan took advantage of this moment and thrust his neck from side to side, piercing his neck from the other end. Blood splattered everywhere, but Arhan was calm and maintained his composure as blood splattered over his face as well. But just as he killed that bandit, he didn't stop there for a moment and he rushed in towards the other bandit. Filled with fear, the other bandit had no choice but to face Arhan, and he thrust at Arhan with a spear to impale him. In that moment, he was able to generate power through his feet. He launched himself in the air as one of the bandits tried to counter him with a spear. He swiftly landed on both of his feet behind the spearman. Before even the spearman could react, he turned over and thrust with his hand as he stabbed, making use of the momentum. For a moment, the pain spiked in his mind and made him lose consciousness for a moment. He screamed in agony as he quickly pulled the needle out of his hand, and blood leaked all over the place from his hand. But Hegel stated to Mei Li that since she was a woman not born with strength or stamina, time wouldn't be on her side. That's why she was determined she should pierce through the enemy on the first or at most the second attack. Hegel also added that she shouldn't try to compensate for what she lacked, but to make what she had shine. Hegel's natural ability was her flexibility, a body just like a dancer's. In that memory, Meili stepped on her opponent's knee, as if she were trying to launch herself into the air. The opponent was just flabbergasted by witnessing Meili's agility. She flipped over his entire body and was able to launch herself from any position and from any angle and aim exactly for the enemy's throat. With killer eyes, she swiftly rushed in towards the blind spot of her opponent, while the opponent just stood clueless and confused as to what exactly was happening. She stabbed her opponent through his skull, piercing through his mouth as he was just clueless about the entire process. Arhan inherited the same skill from Meili, as the spearman fell onto the ground due to the immense power and agility behind that thrust. He observed the final bandit, who was already shivering and shaking. His grip started to wobble as he started to panic. He was frozen in fear as he witnessed all the inhuman and merciless acts committed by Arhan. Arhan was simply cold and gave him a death stare. The full moon's gaze lit the entire forest as the wind was calm and didn't cause any excess motion. Arhan held a shovel and was burying something as Liam stood beside him, observing Arhan. As Arhan was burying, Liam noticed Arhan's doubts and confusion and asked him if he could cast aside his doubts, at least after his encounter with the bandits. A lifeless corpse surrounded by the ants was being buried. Liam mentioned that if he had the stamina to swing a sword all day without losing his breath, he could easily handle 4 untrained bandits, as Arhan stared at the corpses while he was burying them. Liam even mentioned how, amidst a fight for their lives, his abilities and powers were unlocked in the midst of a life-or-death struggle for the caravan. Arhan realized whatever Liam mentioned was true about the fables his father mentioned about his lineage and the caravan's mighty abilities. His body became flexible just like a dancer, as if responding to the memories in the sword, to the sword owner, and to Meili's memories, which started to grow vivid when the fight began. Due to this, Arhan was able to understand with what kind of heart she fought the world. Arhan finally realized his master, Liam Caravan's, words about the power of digestion. The power of digestion, where the more you understand your opponent, the stronger you become. Liam was concerned about Arhan and told him he would never lie when it comes to swords. Thus, he guaranteed Arhan that his days ahead would be filled with pain and an endless succession of hardships, where Arhan would prefer death rather than pursue his goals. Liam stated that so many things would happen during this journey that, as he said, when compared to the things Arhan would face, he would feel today's ordeal was far better. With a strong heart, Liam questioned Arhan that despite knowing all these, he was still willing to walk through this path. But Arhan was brimming with determination and confidence. He clenched his fists and said that if he could just stab Carlos's throat, he would move forward no matter what surprise the path holds for him. But Arhan realized that the path was indeed difficult. The next day, Arhan was trying to hold on for dear life as Liam was floating behind him without any struggles. Liam instructed Arhan to climb through the huge mountain, barehanded, as he wandered and asked Liam if he was heading in the right direction. The sun was exactly behind the tree, exactly over the horizon, as the birds were flying around the mountains, and the rocks, which he used to step on, collapsed and were unstable. Arhan was hanging on for his dear life, as the mountain had no grip to hold, for as he realized, the mountain was exactly 90 degrees for him to climb, as he had no elevation to climb against. As he was struggling to climb, Liam was mocking Arhan as to where last night's resolve vanished and asked if he was doubting his choices again. But Liam acknowledged that this was also one of Arhan's strengths, as he had always been stubborn since his childhood. Liam said he needed to address that at some point through his journey, but Liam stopped in order to answer Arhan's question first. Liam mentioned that the path of the swordsman is divided into 5 major stages, with the first one being sword beginner, the entrance to the sword, and among them, those with the talent reach the realm of swordwalker. Next comes the sword runner, who would establish themselves as strong and serve as pillars on the battlefield with heavy courage and strong might. Then come the sword experts, the heroes who would overturn the tide of the battle all alone by themselves. And then comes the reigning one above all these swordsmen, worshipped as a god himself by every single one, the realm of the heart sword Swordmaster. As Liam was telling Arhan about the hierarchy, he asked Arhan where he would belong now in the hierarchy. But Arhan replied that he knows his level well, despite Liam expecting a spirited answer. Arhan knew the prerequisite for a swordmaster was handling mana. The storage and the second heart needed to handle mana helped to form a mana heart. But since Arhan hasn't even formed a mana heart yet, he realized he wasn't even qualified enough to be a beginner, as Leon thought Arhan was quite objective about himself. Liam later mentioned that Arhan was not even at the entrance to the sword yet, as he was still a greenhorn among greenhorns. Arhan was struggling to climb and tried to get a good grip on the rocks, as Liam said that this training would lead him onto his beginner's path. Arhan was shocked to hear that he was climbing this difficult terrain just to create his mana heart. Arhan was frustrated as he was taking all the risk by climbing an impossible mountain, just to form a mana heart. Arhan was several feet above the ground level and was scared as Liam put him in a situation where he could actually die. Liam didn't know the existence of an alchemical potion, which wasn't present in his time, to form a mana heart. Another such method was to have a Walker-class knight infuse mana to awaken the user's senses and form a mana heart as well. Arhan even mentioned that the noble ladies who only learned self-defense swordsmanship could easily form mana hearts. Arhan barely gripped onto a rock as he was wondering why he ignored such an easy path and insisted on risking his own life. He started to shiver and tried to firmly hold the rock as he couldn't understand his motives. But Liam explained that forming a mana heart itself wasn't difficult, as following the conventional methods would work too. But Liam caught Arhan's attention as he explained that the blood of the caravan carries the power of strong steel, and therefore, to unleash that mighty power, he would need a stronger vessel to maintain it. Liam suggested that an ordinary person's mana heat wouldn't do anything, and the realm a human could reach with a human heart was merely a human realm. Liam smiled with fire as he suggested to Arhan that if he truly wanted to reach the path of Swordmaster, there was only one thing he must have: a heart of steel, which wouldn't budge or scratch even when clashing with the god himself or the whole world. Liam also stated that there was only one way in which Arhan could forge it. By endlessly pushing Arhan to the brink of death itself, the body would demand a mana heart itself. He also told Arhan that even in their bloodline, a tiny few were able to complete the training to the end, as it was a painful and terrible process. But those who endured all the training until the very end eventually became swordmasters. He asked Arhan if he was motivated after hearing his story. Arhan took his hand and searched for a better position and place to grip. He jumped swiftly and held onto the rock, as he said he was motivated and fired up more than enough. And Liam was proud of Arhan's progress, as he suggested he would never lie about the sword. He stated that Arhan's mana heart would be far more different. It would be so unique from anyone else in the world. The full moon gazed brightly over the eastern region of Campbell. The Verde region, the eastern village of Campbell, remained calm and safe from any malice, as it was a peaceful evening. People in the bar from the village were talking and spreading rumors about the caravan village in the west. People addressed the caravan as the place where they couldn't find a single person for the past year, as it was creepy and eerie. The rumors spread that there was something in the village, but without knowing what it was, people spread misinformation as they don't know exactly what was going on. They were talking about how no news or information had been passed ever since they set foot inside the caravan village. Multiple rumors spread as they were talking about a monster wave the Northern Guardians missed sweeping through the village, while the other rumor was about a dark maid conducting experiments stationed near the village. As they were talking about the caravan, a man with a broadsword was resting nearby. He heard all of the stories and rumors that were floating around, and everyone reached the same conclusion that they didn't want to enter the western village if they didn't want to die. He held the cup firm as he placed it over the table, wondering about the village where people die the moment they enter. He quickly took a napkin and wiped the blood off his mouth. His mouth was injured and was bleeding as he was wiping it off. With a plan over his mind, he realized the caravan village would do nicely for his purposes, which are unknown yet. Ever since that day, Arhan started hanging from the cliff using only his left hand. He trained vigorously even on the days when his whole body was drained after dealing with all the intruders in the mansion. He never quit on days when the muscle pain from the training was so bad from pulling huge boulders that even lifting his arm was hard. But despite all the struggles and despite all the pain, he endured them all and did not skip a single day from climbing the cliff. He eventually reached to the top of the cliff as he really gave everything he had. A month passed. He was continuing Liam's training regimen, but he had questioned himself whether all the insane training would let him complete his mana heart. But unfortunately, it didn't help Arhan to unlock his mana heart. He rested upon the dead tree woods as he was glancing at his hardened hands. But this did not waver his confidence as he smirked, knowing the changes are very near and they are undeniable. A chain whip was rushing inside the caravan's castle as it wreaked havoc and destroyed all the properties of the castle itself. But Arhan was caught point blank as the chain caught up to him and was so close to hitting him and severely injuring him. But Arhan slipped through the chains and rushed in as he was trying to position himself near the user, with the hopes of punishing his fragile move against his improved agility. But just as he dodged, Arhan realized the chain was bouncing off the walls in a random motion throughout the hallway of the caravan's mansion. As the bandit swiftly altered the trajectory of the chain's motion, Arhan realized that even though he didn't unlock his mana heart, his senses had become incredibly sharp and heightened. The chain swiftly closed the distance between Arhan and rushed in with high speed as he realized his sight, hearing, and the rest of his 5 senses were improved. Within that instant, the chain quickly came around Arhan and tried to hit him from the front. Arhan evaded it with ease, as he predicted his move and also realized, along with these senses, that the harsh training also improved his judgment and focus in dealing with such situations. The chain crashed over the deep ends of the hallway as Arhan swiftly rushed in between the chains, quickly rushing towards the bandit. He gripped his sword firmly. Arhan realized that his senses had become incomparably better, and he was able to focus on a single point. The bandit tried to use the sickle against Arhan just as he rushed in. He swung his kusarigama with immense force and speed, which would have sliced any normal human with ease, if not killed them with minimum effort. Just as the sickle went near his face, just for that brief instance, it felt like everything except him had come to a halt. The sickle almost tore his eyes, as it was inches away from devouring and ripping his eyes off. But reflexively, Arhan ducked at the very last moment and prevented the momentum of his sprint burst. But instead of completely stopping, he slid along the ground, passing near the bandit, who was open after he just missed his point-blank swing from both ends of his kusarigama. The bandit was surprised by his lightning-fast reflexes, and he was scared for his life as he was completely open. But before even the bandit could react, Arhan quickly stabbed through his chest, completely piercing through his body as blood splattered everywhere from his back. Arhan was calm and composed throughout the execution, with a cold, dead, and empty stare. The bandit felt immense pain throughout his body as blood ran stale over his body. The stab was so powerful and quick that it actually created an image of him being stabbed multiple times at multiple places throughout his body. Arhan realized that the only reason for the change between the former self and the current self was that he could feel mana now. Arhan sat amidst the skeletal remains of the dead wood forest, releasing a long, heavy breath that seemed to carry the weight of his exhaustion into the stagnant, cold, dry air surrounding him. They placed the Kusarigama sickle of his opponent, who tried to barge into the caravan's mansion the other day. Just like that, Arhan placed all the weapons of the bandits who fell for his thrusting sword, impaled over the ground. Arhan sat along a tree while Liam was floating as he was discussing with Liam since he had not even found a mana heart yet, making him not even eligible for the beginner level, and still wondered how he had come this far. In a moment of quiet reflection, he expressed his sincere gratitude toward the delicate needle and its exceptionally skilled owner Mali for the vital assistance they provided. But amidst all the confusion, Arhan still wondered and asked Liam a question about what kind of powers he would gain once he had reached the next realm. Liam mentioned that to be impressed just by that, Arhan was far from shedding his greenhorn skin. But just to satisfy Arhan's curiosity, he chose to answer his question. Liam mentioned that once he forms a mana heart, he would have to become a sword beginner who would understand the depth of that power, because only then could he say he stood on equal ground with the needle's former owner. If he took another step beyond that, he would draw out paths from his mana heart, and he would reach a superhuman realm where he could enhance his body and shape an offense and defense. The realm of superhumans. Liam mentioned that the world calls this realm a swordwalker. Liam mentioned that it might be the very next stage after beginner, but Liam also mentioned that he would understand the vast difference between the two. As the gravity of the situation finally settled, a cold wave of clarity washed over Arhan, revealing the grim reality of the dangerous path that was now awaiting him. But curious about another fact, he asked Liam one more question about what he felt. He asked if the man who came into the territory not long ago and settled in was a swordwalker or not. Liam was affirmative that he was indeed a swordwalker, but he also added that he's completely on a different level from the trash Arhan had faced so far. Liam even asked what Arhan would do, as even in his current state, he would not last a second. But Arhan knew this reality and said he would maintain his distance, and he would keep watching the situation and prepare himself for the worst. Arhan realized he had no other options, but Liam mentioned that he could always abandon this land and avoid a hopeless battle. But Arhan's determination hid his eyes, as he knew that was a choice he could not make. He gazed upon the night horizon and the mountain range as though the whole place had been ruined so badly that it was barely recognizable. It was still the only place that held the memories of everyone. Liam remained silent as he didn't know what to say to comfort Arhan. After what felt like an eternity of suffocating stillness, he finally fractured the heavy silence by imploring Arhan to push past his current limits and grow significantly stronger for the trials ahead. Liam mentioned that in this Iron Kingdom, only the strong have a say, and even the most natural wish for now was nothing but greed and luxury. He clenched his fists as he told Arhan to keep repeating and chewing on that feeling he had for this moment, and asked him to turn it into the fuel to obtain what he desired the most. He asked him to use that trial as nourishment to harden himself like steel, so none of them would laugh at his words. Arhan thought perhaps the master's words were still echoing in him. The ancient blade suddenly ignited with a brilliant, pulsating aura of pure energy that vibrated through the air, casting long, flickering shadows against the cold stone walls. Not soon after, a duel broke out between Arhan and the sword Swordwalker who chose to step up in the caravan. He threatened Arhan not to run anywhere. Arhan knew the situation wasn't in his favor, as he threatened to cut Arhan down on the spot if he showed his back. The unexpected trial arrived sooner than he expected. The obsidian sky broke into rain as the droplets pierced through the air. Even though the land was completely devastated, the natural phenomenon continued. The rain flourished in the barren land, which was devoid of people. But ever since the mysterious man set foot in the territory, observing him became part of Arhan's daily routine. But he didn't quite understand what he learned from all that observation, as the mysterious man seemed to regard the village, which was full of vacant houses, as owned by someone. He never touched even a small trinket, and he continued to live with only the belongings he brought with him. Arhan also observed that the mysterious man would always gaze at the sunset every evening, seemingly lost in thought. He also observed that apart from watching the sunset, the mysterious man would also spend his time in prayer by kneeling down with his sword tip facing the ground in the middle of the night. From all the observations Arhan made, he came to the conclusion that this mysterious man appeared to be a knight. As Arhan was observing the guest from a distance by taking the tree as cover, Liam also agreed with him. He also added that, despite being a sword walker, he followed rules and etiquette strictly, even when no one was watching, making him a rigid type, which is quite rare outside of knights. Arhan was quite relieved, as he thought the guest might not be a bad first neighbor, as he assumed that knights would always uphold honor and pursue justice. But Liam knew it was the other way around. He told Arhan that while the knights pursue honor, calling the knights righteous would be a stretch. Being a warrior himself, he told Arhan that honor was always inherently subjective, and the honor knights chased and followed would not necessarily yield a good outcome for everyone. Liam also stated that a true knight's honor would always be determined by the one they have sworn loyalty to, that is, the will of their employer, who would provide the knights with valuable wealth. With a stale face, Liam redefined what a knight means to Arhan. Liam said that the knights would use honor as justification for violence and regarded knights as annoying enemies to deal with, as they are covered with expensive armor. Arhan was surprised as Liam advised him not to be buried by the term knight, and asked him to observe and judge the essence of the subject itself. With a firm glance, he stared at Arhan and stated that suspicion was his precious specialty. Arhan was quite confused by his master's advice. However, Liam was adamant about his statement and said he had always been like that since childhood, referring to himself. Even though his father told stories of caravans, Arhan was deep down endlessly probing the truth behind those stories. Liam also gave insights about situations where Arhan could have endangered himself by being drunk on newfound power. But Liam was relieved that Arhan found answers by eliminating variables through his observation skills. This particular insight was with reference to when Arhan was facing the bandits all by himself in his manor. Liam told Arhan that suspicion means not being swayed by what he would simply see and hear, but using every means and method and endless thoughts to approach the truth. Liam mentioned that those who knew that no suspicion could ever surpass their limits. But Arhan was gifted with that attitude, and Liam told him not to lose it, as it was his talent for the sword. Arhan knew what his strengths and weaknesses were. As the guest was praying, Arhan stood up and affirmed to his master Liam that he would not forget it. The full moon gazed over the sky as Arhan never let his guard down around the strange guest, having received that training. The sun rose over the horizon, and as Arhan knew the stranger would not turn into an uninvited guest, he approached him slowly, intending to invite him to be his neighbor. The ancient blade suddenly ignited with a brilliant, pulsating aura of pure energy that vibrated through the air. The stranger pointed his sword at Arhan and threatened him not to run away from him, as he knew Arhan was watching him the whole time. Arhan felt the immense aura from the stranger and knew the difference in their power levels, and realized he was at a disadvantage. As the stranger was pointing his sword at Arhan, it emanated an immense aura over the sword. But the aura wasn't from the sword itself, but rather it was the sword walker himself who was emanating it. With a cold stare, he threatened Arhan that he would cut him down on the spot if he showed his back and ran away. Arhan broke a sweat, knowing it was impossible for him to beat the stranger. He held his needle firmly, as Arhan did not expect that the situation would be this complicated. The sewing gypsy, the alias of the previous owner of the needle, was more widely known than she thought. But she was grateful that she would also receive recruitment offers from fairly renowned mercenary groups. But on the other hand, thugs who heard the rumors about her started to pick fights with her more and more often, as it hurt their egos. But living through the days like that, she came to a certain thought of her own. She stabbed through the knee of a bandit who was startling her, as she realized she would be gone beyond being just a female mercenary who used a needle. She was determined to become a truly strong swordswoman. But a few days passed, her determination was shattered, just like her needle, and she realized that thought was nothing more than arrogance. A knight stood before Melee, menacingly, as he was asking her if she was truly the sewing gypsy. The knight gleamed at her face through his mask and realized it was indeed a fitting name for that feeble blade of hers. Melee was completely stunned, as the rogue knight told her that she seemed to have prided herself on being quite the skilled fighter. Suddenly, the knight grabbed Melee by her hair and humiliated her by saying she was nothing but a worthless mercenary. The knight said that if she weren't a woman, she would be dead already, and also added that she was no different from vermin. The knight walked away and told Melee that the only reason she lives is because of the Red Falcon Knight's code, to never take the lives of women and children. Melee felt powerless, as the knight told her to live the rest of her life grateful to his chivalry. Despite the heavy loss she suffered, she still reached out to her broken needle and held it firmly. She realized that the difference between her skills and those of the knight was so vast, and the power gap was immense. But she learned that the realm the knight reached was called Swordwalker. Arhan knew his disadvantages as he realized the melee's memories, which he encountered right now, were far stronger, and even he couldn't put up a fight with him. As the stranger was pointing his sword towards Arhan, he knew death was ahead of him. But this time, the sensation was more vivid and overwhelming than when he was hanging from the cliff. Because of this, his heartbeat rose and pounded heavily. The sensation was almost visible from outside, as if it was pounding beyond his chest. But Arhan's eyes sparked, and he realized something. A gust of wind blew across the standoff between the stranger and Arhan. Arhan realized that the superhuman realm is possible only from walker rank and above, where the mana is spread outside the body, just like the veins would be enhanced by adding will to attack and defense. Arhan realized that by the after image, he was already sliced up fatally across his face, body, and torso. He quickly realized that this was nothing but the Swordwalker's path. As Arhan was realizing, the stranger asked why he was stalking him, and he also knew that he was the rumored entity that attacked the place's visitors. The stranger demanded an answer. If he didn't have a valid reason, he would have to consider Arhan as his enemy. Amidst the standoff, Arhan replied that he was trying to distinguish whether he was a guest or an uninvited one, but the stranger demanded more detail for his explanation. Arhan revealed that he was born and raised here, and while he was away, a catastrophe struck his village which made his neighbors disappear, and he stated that the village had fallen into ruin. The stranger glanced at Arhan as he continued his story about how he dealt with all the barbarians who tried to threaten him and his village. With the intention of not telling the stranger the whole truth, he continued his story by adding that he dealt with all of them all by his own hand. But he added that the stranger was immensely stronger than he, and he was very careful of approaching him to prevent death. And Arhan said that was why he was judging if he was an uninvited guest or a guest, and he expressed his willingness to welcome him as his neighbor if he was interested. But if the stranger has malicious intentions towards Arhan and his kingdom, then he would have to devise other means to defend his territory. But the stranger was confused, as Arhan was still ready to face him, even after knowing the skill difference between them. Arhan's determination towards the land made him stay, as that land holds his life's memories, good, bad, and everything. But the stranger was almost too stunned to react to his words, as Arhan continued that his land was too precious to abandon and flee. But the stranger's eyes drowned with sorrowfulness within a fraction of a second, pondering about a precious place, a ghost of his memory. The stranger smiled, and he understood that Arhan had been through tough times, all by himself, despite his young age. Arhan was still on his guard as the stranger added that he expressed his will to become neighbors and to know each other's circumstances. Thus, the stranger told Arhan to stop being stiff and lower his guard, and he would sheath his sword as well and tell his side of the story. But Arhan had other plans. Liam's words struck his mind as he was telling Arhan how to forge a heart of steel. That is, by pushing himself to the brink of death until his body itself demands a mana heart. Being motivated by his master's advice, he refused. Arhan still stood by his guard and told the stranger that he could not trust him fully, and he needed that sword for at least a minimal amount of defense. This surprised the stranger, as he told Arhan that if he was truly intending to harm him, his sword would be meaningless, as the skill gap is too wide. He told Arhan that with both of them on their guard with their weapons, sheathing first goes against his honor code, and he was willing to protect it at any cost. But Arhan still refused, knowing that code as well, and stated that even he could not back down. The reason behind Arhan's refusal was that he had once kneeled down in fear and given up before even fighting against the catastrophe itself, Carlos. With a sheer determination on his face, he swore that he would never do it again. The wind was breezing over the standoff as the stranger and Arhan both stood firm on their ground. The stranger was surprised by Arhan's unwavering words, filled with determination, with an appearance delicate enough to be mistaken for a girl. He noticed his stance and realized the traces of enduring harsh training were visible all over his body. The stranger also noticed his build, which was too small, yet he managed his balance well. But he also realized the flaws in Arhan's form, as he understood he had not learned the sword through any proper methods, and it was just an unorthodox form that poured all the strength into the first strike. He knew Arhan hadn't escaped the beginner's framework and realized he wasn't even the slightest threat to him. But Arhan knew this fact himself. But despite knowing this fact, Arhan's eyes were gleaming with determination, and he was locked in. It was as if Arhan had a plan of attack as well as defense in his mind. The stranger took a deep breath, exhaling the mana as he was calming his mind. The blade emanated the blue mana as well, glowing through the atmosphere. But he gathered his will, as a half-hearted response would not suffice. His mana was controlled and prepared. The man sparked a line of sight between him and Arhan, a path, estimating the distance between him and Arhan. Within a fraction of a second, the stranger closed the distance between them, blitzing Arhan at point-blank range. He dual-wielded his blade with the intention of striking him at his wrist to disarm him. He closed the distance in no time and thought striking his wrists was the best means of action in order to not hurt him. But Arhan is locked in. Within a moment, the stranger's blade rebounded due to an impact, which created a spark as if the knight had steel. This caught the knight off guard, as he could not figure out what exactly was going on. The knight realized Arhan deflected his blade as his blade was still vibrating due to the impact they had, and was surprised by his deflection without even receiving beginner-level training. Just as he deflected the knight's attack, Arhan was pushed over due to the impact he felt from the knight. He exhaled mana just like the knight and was prepared for him. With just one single breath, Arhan made his surrounding mana ripple like waves. The knight questioned himself if it was formed inside the boy within that instant, showcasing his heterogeneous mana heart. The knight was still questioning his form and was surprised by Arhan's swordsmanship, as it was impossible for him to deflect his sword strike. He thought it was because of the mana heart Arhan possessed, as any normal mana heart would tend to be soft and flexible. But unlike a normal mana heart, Arhan's mana heart had a clear and solid shape. But considering his swordsmanship, he realized Arhan's mana heart was remarkably firm and solid, just like steel. After exchanging their strike, one thing was clear for the knight, even though he could not say anything for certain. He knew Arhan's sword would come as a lifelong strike, carrying everything he had. Arhan exhaled after being knocked back due to the immense force he experienced. His hand started to tremble as blocking the knight's sword was not a part of his skill. He breathed heavily, as he knew it was purely luck. The moment he rushed in, Arhan knew the knight had no intention of harming him, and he aimed for his wrist, which was non-vital, and Arhan realized the deflection was possible because the force on his sword was minimal. Arhan even predicted the trajectory of the knight's blade, and he thrust the needle's tip into that gap. Considering all the factors, Arhan realized that because of these reasons, he was able to block the blade. But despite parrying the knight's blade, the consequences were hard, as he absorbed a shock just like he had crashed into a galloping carriage with a bare body. Arhan's body was wrapped in intense pain, as if every bone in his body shattered. Just like a starving wolf, Arhan realized there was truly a desperate gap in power. But Arhan smiled despite his disadvantage. Even though the situation was against him, Arhan awakened his mana heart of steel, which he had been desperately longing for. But even after awakening his mana heart of steel, he realized he was still just a beginner, and he also realized his thrust would not reach him. But in order to strike back, he realized there was only one way. Arhan should create his own path. Arhan knew it would be possible if he used the heart of steel and the sewing gypsy, Meli's memories, as a foothold. Meli's memories flashed again as she held her needle firmly, even after facing such a failure against the knight. Her body trembled in fear after facing such an insurmountable limit head-on, facing a swordwalker. But as soon as fear was instilled in her, all she could hear was Hagel's words. Before Hegel drew his last breath, he shared a few words with Meli. He advised Meli not to forget that most of the swordsmen would consider a wall an insurmountable limit when they face it, but it was nothing but an excuse for those who would choose comfort and lack courage. With barely any life left within him, he mentioned that walls exist to be overcome. Hegel also mentioned that the fear before them was the fate of those who held the swords, nothing more than a step to climb higher. With barely any energy left, Meli stood up despite her trembling. She took her master's advice seriously, not to turn back and to stand proud. Red mana emanated throughout the battlefield, making the battle not over yet. The red aura was emanating from the knight himself, who challenged Meli. But instead of running away, she chose to face him directly, head to head. As the knight held his sword with the intention of killing her, she stood her ground and held onto the needle firmly. Suddenly, the knight made the first move, leaping towards Meli. The knight quickly slashed at Meli, but her quick reflexes were on point and helped her to dodge it. But the knight relentlessly continued to slash, and Meli relentlessly continued to evade them. Amidst the battle, the sword sliced her skin near the eyes. But she was already certain of the fact that she would be cut and torn miserably over and over, and did not hesitate. As the knight continued to injure her, she also knew she would collapse and fall on her knees eventually. Suddenly, blood splattered over the battlefield. Mali quickly took advantage of the gap that was present between the helm and the chest plate and swiftly stabbed the knight through his neck. Meli smirked as she stood victorious because of her determination, and eventually she was able to surpass that insurmountable wall. Thus, this memory of Meli sparked inside Arhan. He set his heart of steel ablaze and believed in himself, as there was nothing else to do. The stranger was still surprised about Arhan's parry of his sword strike. He held his sword firmly, as he thought anyone who held a sword and lived their life fiercely would face it. The immense wall that stood before Arhan was nothing but the stranger himself. His pressure would seep through anyone's skin, and the suffocating despair that threatens anyone would crush them. His mana release was more than enough to stop anyone in their place, making it impossible for anyone to take a step forward. The pressure would also make them tremble, as the tremor of fear would want them to run as far as possible, realizing the amount of threat he poses. But despite all the signs that he noticed from his victims, he noticed something unusual with Arhan. The insurmountable wall started to crack and crumble away, which stood before Arhan. This was because Arhan decided not to run away just like any others would do. Instead, he chose to face it. Arhan was nothing more than a resistance of recklessness. But the stranger was excited about his interaction with a person like this, as it was exactly the trial he needed. It didn't matter if the path was not perfect or crude and incomplete as it may be. He placed his feet firmly on the ground as he realized that, as long as there's even a chance of reaching it, that was more than enough for him. Arhan's eyes glowed with mana as he started to question everything. He started to analyze the knight's mana, which surrounded him, and started to calculate which muscles the knight tenses, how he breathes, and what kind of trajectory his sword would take. Arhan was determined to gather every clue and strip away the unnecessary parts and forge everything into one. His heart of steel resolved into a solid crystal as it emanated an aura within him. Arhan prepared his needle to strike against the knight by covering his mana around his needle. Arhan calculated almost every single path that would help him to take advantage of the knight in order to defeat him. All his mana paths, which emanated from Arhan's body, were trying to make a connection with the knight's mana heart in order to find the most efficient path. Liam stood proud after observing Arhan's physical abilities, as he never yielded in the face of adversity. He gathered all his mana to a single junction. The mana paths that he created converged into one single beam of mana, which was emanated towards the knight. With sheer determination in his eyes, he never showed any fear against what he faced, and he continued to concentrate his mana on a single path towards the knight. Suddenly, the mana energy spiked as he understood the will of the caravan. Arhan swiftly rushed in towards the knight, almost blitzing him instantly. With his blade tucked behind, he rushed in with caution as well, without breaking his guard down. Suddenly, Mei's memories flashed again, as she was rushing towards her opponent just like Arhan did now. But despite rushing towards the knight with malicious intent, she was afraid of surviving alone amidst the burning flames. But the whole tragedy was nothing but the beginning of everything. As she rushed in, she remembered the days when she could not even face her own reflection, and days when even breathing felt unbearable. As she stood by the ground, she later came to understand what she truly feared. It was not the fire itself, but her own weakness that kept her running from it. She held her needle firmly, as if she were ready to pierce everything and anything at once. She remembered the memories of her house burning down due to chaotic embers. She remembered the day when her parents were burned to death in her own house. She remembered the day when she saw how bad the scar messed up her face, all because of the embers, which took everything from her. It was as if she were facing the fire embers. She screamed as she was facing the flame, as if someone asked whether she pierced through it. But there was only one answer, as she realized she was no longer afraid of fire nor the world, which acted as the catalyst for her vengeance. Arhan thrust the flames with his needle, symbolizing she herself defeated her flames. Just like the flames were for Mei Li, the rogue knight was for Arhan, as he continued to thrust against the knight. Arhan was ready to exchange blows with the rogue swordwalker, who was way above his league. But the knight held his sword with both of his hands and thrust it against Arhan. Arhan was mindless about his thrust, as he was giving every single ounce of his power. But so did the swordwalker, who thrust his sword against Arhan mindlessly just like him. The needle pierced the atmosphere, but the blade sliced through the air, almost tearing the atmosphere. A blue spark lit up the vicinity as the clash rippled through the atmosphere. But Arhan's needle broke and was spinning over the air due to the impact it shared with the rogue swordwalker. The broken needle was still in the air, as it wasn't just cut in half but shattered into fragments. But as the broken needle fell, Meli's memories only held questions for Hegel, if he's at peace and wondering about his whereabouts as he followed his advice to leave the orphanage. She was standing by the gaze of the full moon as she walked into the world after listening to Hegel's advice. With a broken needle on her hand, she also held on to the lessons Hegel gave her. She was also grateful for Hegel to place a single needle in her hand, as it helped her to achieve a longing for a life of freedom, just like Hegel's. But she was not really sure if she could say that she truly loved the way Hegel intended her to live. The world was overflowing with monsters stronger than her, and countless walls could never be overcome with will alone. But despite everything she was thinking amidst the chaos, she was certain about one thing. Hegel stood up against the man who wielded a mace, as she realized she never turned her back even when she was at the very last moment of her life. Mélie stood on her ground, despite being heavily injured and exhausted, as she was thinking if Sergen's doctrine was true, then she would meet again within the embrace of the flames. She stood over the forest field as she was thinking if she could tell her own story for Hegel himself. Just as she was thinking about him, her eyes instantly teared up after seeing a familiar figure in the distance. Hegel stood in silence as he smiled at Mélie, and she thought the story would begin with her addressing Hegel. Without hesitation, she ran towards Hegel, as she could not contain herself after witnessing him. She leaped towards Hegel, and Hegel was ready to embrace her with warmth as she began to tell Hegel the story that she was no longer afraid of the fire. He hugged Hegel and broke down in his chest as he embraced her with light and warmth. But in the meantime, the needle was completely digested for Arhan. The sun went down as sparkles of the flame embers were over the atmosphere. Arhan barely opened his eyes as he went through the Mélie's memories after the needle's digestion was complete. As he was trying to figure out what and where exactly he was, he saw his broken needle beside him, and it made sense as to what could have happened during his clash with the knight. Arhan was next to a small campfire, which caused the flame particles, and he realized that he lost his consciousness due to his battle with the knight. But when Arhan woke up, he realized that the robe, which covered his body to protect him from the cold weather, belonged to the Swordwalker. But Arhan looked at his broken needle and realized that he could not break through his mana heart by the path he created. With disappointment, he held the broken needle with a firm grip, and he stared at it without any thoughts intervening in his mind, at least for a short period of time. But Liam, who witnessed the entire battle, consoled Arhan that he gave his best, and there was no need to be disheartened by the outcome of the battle. Liam's phantom was in the air, as he told Arhan that it was a struggle worthy of the caravan name. Liam wore a smile over his face as he told Arhan that along with that painful defeat, Arhan also unlocked something else, and the master asked Arhan if he was aware of it. Arhan's mana was spiked with red veil, indicating that the needle's digestion was complete. Arhan held onto the needle as he realized he could feel his muscles had become incomparably more flexible than before. A rat quickly ran beside him at a distance, but Arhan was able to notice it with ease. This indicated his senses have also sharpened like those of a wild beast. Arhan became aware of himself as he felt like he had lived a lifetime on the battlefield, and he had become a veteran mercenary through and through after all the experiences he had gathered from the fights. Arhan finally understood why his master Liam chose the needle, Arhan. Liam understood the needle's previous owner's capabilities, as he knew it wasn't just about the power or the technique. But instead, Liam wanted to show Arhan her entire life itself. Apart from that, Liam mainly wanted to show Mélie's Arhan's unyielding will and how it would feel to bear one. The unyielding will that never gives up at any cost, even on the brink of death or even before the immense trials. Arhan listened to his master, but he expressed his master's hesitation to tell them from the start itself, instead of now. As Liam and Arhan were exchanging words, someone drew closer to the campfire as he marched towards them. Arhan's attention quickly averted towards the stranger as he told Arhan that he seemed to have regained consciousness by addressing Arhan as young lord. It was the same swordwalker who defeated Arhan in the fight. But instead of being hostile, he told Arhan he went to fetch some water for Arhan to drink, and as Arhan was skeptical about his intentions, he swiftly removed the robe over him to get up on his feet. But despite Arhan's defensive action, he was simply awkward about how to confront him. As Arhan was confused as he held his needle firmly in order to defend himself, the Swordwalker told Arhan there was a misunderstanding between both of them, which needed to be cleared up. Even Liam assured Arhan that there was no need to be wary about the Swordwalker, as he was someone who would not harm him. But Arhan could not let his guard down, as suspicion was unavoidable for him. But the Swordwalker understood Arhan, and given all that he went through, it was natural for him to not let his guard down that easily. Thus, the Swordwalker kept down the water he fetched and asked him if he was willing to let his guard down if he told his story first. He held his clothes firmly, as if he was trying to remove them. He continued to speak with a calm and composed mind and told him he would like to tell him why he was there in this place and why he could not possibly be a threat to him. Arhan was confused by his actions and his words. But what Arhan witnessed completely shook him to the core. The swordwalker introduced himself as Petal, a retired knight and a wanderer who had no place to go. As he removed his shirt, he disclosed that he was a terminally ill patient facing death. His body was partially rotten with negative mana, which was truly a terrifying sight to behold. Petal mentioned that even the high priests who would spend their lives mastering medicine could not help him and declared that he has at most a month. Arhan was too stunned to speak after what he had witnessed, as Petal told him that he was nothing more than a dying patient waiting for death. Arhan finally lowered his guard, and Petal asked Arhan to hear him out. The brief commotion settled down as they continued to speak by the campfire warmth. Arhan noticed that, unlike his skill with the sword, Petal was not particularly eloquent, and he repeated himself often and rambled through his story and feelings without a particular order. It was clear for Arhan that it certainly was not smooth communication. But to Arhan, the awkwardness was nothing more than an unadorned sincerity. After speaking with Petal, Arhan learned a few things about him. After he received his terminal diagnosis, he left his knight order and devoted himself to finding a place to die. Petal told Arhan that his reason to quit the order was not anything particularly grand, and he just did not want to be a burden as he concluded his breathless life. For his final moments, he just wanted some quiet time and place for himself. Arhan felt empathetical for him, as he could not speak any more words. Even Liam assured Arhan that there was no lie to his words, to reduce his suspicion. Liam also mentioned that even at that very moment his man's heart was being completely devoured by the disease. It was cancerous, as it slowly invaded his man's heart from outside. He also said once that if that thing reached his actual heart, his life would eventually come to an end. The silence was too deafening, as the weight of his words was too heavy for Arhan to process. But Petal extended his arm and asked Arhan if it was enough for him to become his neighbor. Arhan just stared at Patel's hand as he was processing everything. But Arhan stood up, and he said that it was really a devastating story to share, and thanked him for sharing it with him. He shook his hands with Petal and introduced himself as the last resident of the nameless forgotten land. He welcomed his first neighbor, Sir Petal, as Petal expressed his gratitude for Arhan's hospitality. Liam was just observing everything beside Arhan, but he was happy and proud about his young descendant. He continued to observe Arhan from behind as he was speaking with Petal. He noticed Arhan's heart of steel and decided it was time to take the next step. Liam smirked, as he exactly knew what needed to be done. He thought of a violent place that would be of help for Arhan to grow strong. A few days later, Arhan and Liam were traveling over a cart through a grass field as the sun shone bright over them. But it was hard for him to understand what his master Liam Caravan was thinking about. As they were traveling, Arhan thought Liam would teach him his swordsmanship directly as he finally reached Sword Beginner. But Liam was thinking something else as Arhan asked about the place that Liam wanted him to visit before training him. Arhan was happy that Sir Petal was there to protect his mansion from intruders. Arhan asked Liam if it was really necessary for them to travel that far away. But Liam was disappointed, as Arhan hadn't escaped his ordinary way of thinking. He was disappointed as he told Arhan that caravans were different from anyone else from this world, and very special. He told Arhan as long as steel blood flows through his veins, his growth would require less conventional sword training and more endless struggle to push his body to its limits. He told him that devouring new swords must always be his top priority. Liam mentioned that the destination that they were heading to was the perfect place for that purpose. Arhan was intrigued by Liam as he told him it was a place unconcerned with status or origin, where only those who crave bloodlust battles gather. It was more like an arena of life or death duels. Swords clashed intensely with the sole intention of tearing each other apart. People were fierce as they continued to exchange deadly strikes upon their foes, whereas people felt a dopamine rush after witnessing the cruel battle over the arena. The impact was felt over the entire arena as it was filled with a masochistic audience. Arhan and Liam finally arrived at their destination, the Fighting Pit. The Fighting Pit was located over Ferma, the Iron City. It was one of the cities symbolizing the Iron Kingdom and a place where metallurgy had developed so extensively. It would be no exaggeration to say that each and every armament in the Iron Kingdom was crafted here, and thus, it was also called the Holy Land of Swords. But it was not the major driving force that revived Ferma. It was located elsewhere. It was the arena where Arhan and Liam were heading to. Liam was confused, as the name was changed with the flow of time, as the ring to it was not too bad. But he wasn't surprised by the amount of heat that was radiating outside the stadium, as it hadn't changed a bit. His eyes brimmed with the memories from the past as diverse struggles were fought here in the past. For example, the beat duel was held in the stadium to determine which was the stronger beast among them. The other one was the wild duel, where humans entered the pit to face off against beasts. The other one was an interspecies duel, where different species fought in the pit to decide superiority between different races. Even though all of them are fierce and brutal, the most intense one among them all was the deathmatch. Deathmatch was so brutal, where gladiators equipped with unique traits and techniques rolled on the dirt ground and fought like beasts. The winner claimed the loser's life, and by taking everything left behind as the spoils of war, it was truly a frenzy of mortal combat. Meanwhile, the audience was drunk on the scent of blood and willingly threw gold coins and bet with passion. Firma was nothing but a city of madness built atop the deep pools of blood they had spilled. Liam was oddly excited as Arhan acknowledged his master's decision to come to this place to grow strong. Arhan realized that not only would he gain practical experience, but also he could grow strong by devouring the weapons from the fallen gladiators. But Liam disagreed with him and told Arhan that he's a simple-minded descendant. Liam mentioned that if it was that simple, he would have made him devour everything from the weapons that were scattered over the trash heap. Or it would have been much easier by devouring the keepsakes left by the uninvited guests. Liam mentioned that it would not work by simply eating recklessly. Liam warned Arhanat not to do it, as if he ever did it, he would soon be consumed by the mixed memories of the swords and lose himself during that process. He mentioned that he should control the sword and not the other way around. Thus, Liam told Arhan that until he opens his eye himself, he should consume the swords that he personally selects. As they were exchanging words, they continued on their way to the scorching field of struggle. After a few hours, all the gladiators and fighters equipped with armor and tools were walking by the pit. The fighters were warming up as Arhan was registering for the event. Since it was his first time participating, the receptionist advised Arhan to head to the player registration desk and get his medal issued first. As the other participants were trying to intimidate Arhan, the receptionist said it was impossible for him to participate without a medal. Arhan was confused about this medal system, and he turned towards Liam to ask about it. But just as Arhan, even Liam was confused about the medal system. He could not remember any medal system in the past when he was fighting, as he was breaking a sweat. Arhan was also completely shocked to see that Liam had no idea about it, and it would delay their process to register. The receptionist showed a medal to demonstrate what it would look like, and she told him to get his medal and get back in line. Basically, the medal system was used as a weight class marker unique to the arena, representing a measure of martial power through colors determined by one's fame, status known to the world, and match records. The order of the weight classes is as follows. Black medal on top, then comes white medal, then platinum medal, then comes gold medal, then silver medal, and so on. But naturally, the only one that Arhan could ever receive was bronze-colored. Arhan stared at his bronze medal as Liam added that quite a lot had changed. As Arhan was telling Liam that it was quite different from his sentiments of a few hours ago, Liam was shocked, as he had already been told about the atmosphere. Whether it was a bookworm who never held a sword or a barbarian who butchered 100 men, they would put up with it as it was. But this new weight class system disappointed Liam, as he felt it was preposterous, and in the end, it must all be because of money. Arhan knew if the blood duels occurred for over hundreds of years, not only would there be no gladiators left, but also the money that the audience uses for betting. It was a formal system, where experts fight experts and novices fight novices for it to be entertaining. This was more fair for the system, and thus the times have changed. Because of this, the arena had become a symbolic landmark that people would visit from afar, not only for tourism, but it also flourished into the current metropolis of Ferme, remarking it as a very successful change. And as the times have changed, even if they win a duel, the opponents rarely take the loser's life, making it an implicit rule among the gladiators. Liam was pretty disappointed, as it was not some cheap tavern play, and Arhan added that the loser's body won't exactly be intact as well. Liam had enough, as the more he hears about the new rules, the more dumbfounded he becomes, as it would be fortunate for Arhan. But Liam later agreed to one aspect. Fighting an equal enemy would serve as a decent experience and would provide a different kind of teaching. Liam mentioned that it would be good to look around the smithies in the meantime, as the difference in quality from the small smithies near the caravan would be distinct. Liam was telling about Arhan's sword, as his sword was particularly prone to breaking, and as he was telling him about acquiring a few spare blades, something else caught his attention. Liam was too stunned to react or to speak after what he witnessed. She called Arhan and asked about what he was looking at. Liam was confused as he looked at Liam, but it caught Arhan's attention as well. It was a long display of mythical swords, which was contained inside a glass pane. There were swords with wings attached to their pommels, while there were swords where it was available as a set along with the shield. Arhan wondered why there were weapons in the middle of the street like that. But as they went closer to take a look, Arhan was shocked as Liam continued to maintain his silence. As they were observing, someone stepped behind Arhan as he addressed Arhan, saying that it must be the first time witnessing the Hall of Fame. Arhan turned back to take a look at the person who was speaking with him. The person introduced himself as Tom, the caretaker of the hall, and was willing to give a brief explanation of the place. As he was listening to Tom, he tried to take a look at his master, Liam, to see how he was reacting. But Liam was still too stunned to utter a single word from his mouth. Arhan introduced himself to Tom, and he affirmed that he would like to listen to his explanation. Tom revealed that the armaments displayed over the glass pane belonged to the gladiators who achieved amazing feats in the arena in the past. Tom revealed that every single one of them is old and worn, having lost its function as a weapon. Thus, instead of disposing of them, they are exhibited to honor their fighting spirit. Arhan was astounded by the display of blades as Tom told him to ask any questions that would strike his mind. It would be of a small sense of worth as the caretaker of the honored place. But quickly, Liam told Arhan to ask a question to Tom. He told Arhan to ask if there was a way to possess the swords displayed over there. Arhan was surprised as he understood what he meant. Liam set his eyes over a blade, which caught his attention. The blade and the scabbard emanated an aura so immense, and thus Liam decided it was the next sword Arhan must devour.